Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to thank all three of you, Dr. Coop, Dr. Carmona, Dr. Satcher, for...
I can't quite hear you, ma'am.
I'd like to thank all three of you for the courage and you asserted, the independence you asserted with considerable courage. All three of you have had your courage tested, and it's impressive to see how you have responded. I do thank you, Dr. Satchel, for being way ahead of your time on needle exchange in the Clinton administration, which, for all of its progressive stands, would not, in fact, support needle exchange despite knowing full well what the consequences were. Dr. Carmona, I must say, one would have to congratulate the President on his appointment of you following year or so following 9/11. Here, he reaches out and he finds an especially qualified Surgeon General because you'd been in the Special Forces, you were a trauma surgeon, you were an expert in emergency medical services. It was a marvelous appointment. I want to ask you about that work, particularly since I represent the District of Columbia and because I serve on the Homeland Security Committee, because this is where the anthrax attacks took place, right here in the Congress, as a matter of fact, where we lost 2 postal workers, and you know the rest. We have had a hearing in this committee. It was an astounding hearing recently on how hospital emergency services, particularly emergency rooms, are now being stretched to the breaking point. As I understand it, you did use your background in emergency services and sought permission to prepare a report on emergency preparedness. Is that so?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Well, that was before a report was written, sir?
I can give you a general timeline, ma'am. What happened was I came in shortly after 9/11 and the anthrax challenges to our nation. And as I looked at the gaps in our system and where I could assist, especially after being appointed by the Senate and confirmed by the Senate, that there's a great deal of fanfare made about my background, and that I was selected because I had this background in emergency management and preparedness, and pretty much my whole life had been in public service in that area. And I said, well, there are a couple of issues I see before us. One, we're a nation that on a good day has inadequate mental health care. And, 1 in 5 people can't get mental health care on a daily basis in the good times. And now we have war, we have 9/11, we have an anthrax attack, we have people feeling very uncertain about their futures. What are we doing to shore up our mental health issues? And why is that important? Well, when you look at what terrorism does, we often do very well at repairing the physical wounds, but the psychological wounds are lifelong lasting and can devastate a population. So I thought we need to move forward with a mental health preparedness report, as well as a report on preparedness that would bring our nation forward so that all citizens would understand the threats and challenges before us and what their individual responsibility is. Just like we had civil defense in the 50s. We were talking about the new civil defense of the new world, the new world order. So I moved forward with those ideas and tried to move those reports out. And unfortunately, they never got out. They were...
Well, just a moment. This is very almost neutral-sounding request. Emergency preparedness, mental health. Where did you take your request for permission, and what reason was given to you for denying permission?
Well, let me tell you, I'll go each of them. Each of them were slightly different, so I'll start with the mental health one. I had made a commitment to many of my mental health colleagues nationally as well that we needed to move mental health as an agenda item. As you know, my colleague David Setcher before me identified some of the gaps in our systems, and as I took the baton from him metaphorically, I knew that I needed to continue moving in a direction based on some of the information that he had already generated. Mental health was one. Mental health preparedness was extraordinarily important because of the disease.
Who did you ask? I'm trying to find out. You don't go to the President and say, I want to do a mental health on emergency preparedness. Who do you go to?
Yes, ma'am. What I did was, independently, I looked at the science, and the first call I made was to my colleagues at the National Institutes of Mental Health to say, guys, let's have a meeting. I want to talk to you about the mental health needs of the country, specifically as it relates to the new threats and challenges, and we'll call this mental health preparedness as a working title. I got the best scientists in the world together. We had a discussion. Everybody agreed that this was a huge void in our society, that we needed to move this forward. So I generated the evidence base to support such a report moving forward to the American public. I then went and brought in other agencies. I brought in one of our sister agencies who had a political appointee who basically went to HHS, went to the White House and complained vehemently that this was not my responsibility, that he was in charge of mental health, and that, in fact, I was admonished by this gentleman because he said, you don't get it. He said, you don't write anything unless we approve it, and that this information
So on emergency, on mental health, you were not only refused, you were admonished. Before my time is off, would you tell me about the emergency preparedness report?
The emergency preparedness report, similarly, I developed the evidence base to generate the report. I brought my colleagues in, as I always do, to achieve consensus, and by colleagues I mean government and non-government people who have national reputations, credibility, nonpartisan, to achieve consensus. Everybody agreed this was absolutely essential to move forward with. I then, as they say, ran it up the flagpole. I went to domestic policy at the White House, spoke to HHS officials, and I was given lots of different reasons. Well, this might incite, scare the people. We should think about it. I was told that the new Department of Homeland Security would be responsible, and why would the Surgeon General do this? That it should. I had a whole lot of reasons, from cost to everything else, but I could get no traction whatsoever to move this agenda forward.
Well, who in the White House was responsible? Told you that the emergency preparedness report should not move forward?
Ma'am, I was speaking to the domestic policy council persons then, and